Can I welcome you all to this EMCC Global GPS Dialogue? It's brilliant to see so many people from all across the world joining us here today. I'm delighted to welcome Dawn and Diane to this place we have together. And Dawn is very excited at the moment. And I'm excited because I've just got her book as well, Leading Corporate Clowns, which is still, I think the ink is still wet on it. So I'm excited to welcome Dawn. Oh, Diane's got one there as well, I can see. Diane's joining us from the airport. Those were marvellous. Right, so without any further ado, I'm going to hand you all straight over to Dawn and Diane.
Hello, everybody. It's so lovely of you to join us from wherever in the world you're joining. I am joining from the Gold Coast in Australia, and I am really delighted to talk to you about our topic today. I won't give any more away until we get into a little bit of slide share momentarily, but I'll just introduce my co-host and my fabulous business partner, Diane, and she can tell you where she's joining from.
I have just arrived in Brisbane, having flown from London, Copenhagen, Doha, and I've made it by about 3 minutes. So Dawn, I'm delighted, and Nicola, delighted to be with all of you here today.
Thank you. And I'm so happy Diane's here because she will be able to work with me in the way that we normally work together on some of these sessions. It'd be really nice to hear as we go through the sessions, what you've got to say about what we're talking about in the chat box, and also maybe where you're joining us from, what brings you to this topic today, just so that we can get a sense of what our curiosity is as we join together in this space. So I'm going to begin sharing slides and take you through the presentation for today. Thank you. What container do we need? So that's the question for today. And as I am joining you from Ugamba language region in Australia, and those of you joining from Australia will understand what this is, and those of you around the world might understand what this is. This is part of our National Reconciliation Action Plan, and I am delighted to provide an acknowledgement of country from People and OD Partners, which is my organisation, and to say I respectfully acknowledge the people of the Ugamba language region, which is the Gold Coast and northern New South Wales, who are the traditional owners of the land on which we're based as an organisation. And that we pay our respects to their elders past and present, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples across the lands on which we work. So what's happened over the last 4 weeks, and the reason why I've got to know Nicola and I'm running this session now, is that I became really curious the more and more I heard the term team coaching about whether or not that was similar or different to really good facilitation skills and group process, and whether it was different to what I was trained on and raised on through the NTL organisation in the States about group process facilitation. And what was it about team coaching that was different, if anything? And so I started to talk to a number of people, and I decided I wanted to talk to more people. So in the month of October, every Wednesday, I put on a session both in Australia lunchtime and in the UK lunchtime. I brought together a whole range of speakers to talk about team coaching. And I was really curious about purpose of team coaching. Why do we do it and when do we do it? About the process of team coaching, and we'll touch a bit more upon that today. And that's the run up to getting in the room with people, the practice of actually team coaching when we're in the room with people. And then what kind of individuals end up becoming team coaches? What are we requiring from them if we are bringing them into an organisation, if we're procuring them? And what's the future via EMCC of accreditation, of training, and how's that going to develop over time? And so we've had such a fantastic set of conversations over the last 4 weeks on both of those continents. And what we've done at People and OD Partners then is for each of the conversations we've had, and the last one was only last night, session 4, we've produced a discovery session booklet, 8 pages about the content of the conversation that we had and the slides that we discussed. So that QR code will take you to the flip book for session 3. But what I've agreed with Nicola is that I will provide the link for all 4 booklets. The last booklet will be produced on Monday. So if you're interested in the wider, deeper conversations that we've had over the last 4 weeks, then you'll be provided some places to go and find out a bit more about those conversations. So today's topic is What container do we need for that team coaching experience, both for us and for the client? And some definitions really first in terms of what do we mean by a container? And there's loads of different types of containers. And I think I really wanted to share with you what's in my mind when I'm working with teams and I'm the team coach or the group process facilitator or the facilitator. And one of the things we learned in these discovery sessions is, as practitioners, we can get a bit hung up on language sometimes, and we need to call this magic thing that we might be doing with people, whatever resonates for the client. But what do we mean by container? So in my mind, let's visualize for a moment, as we often help our clients to do as coaches. Let's visualize a basket. And a basket for me, a wicker basket, is my visualization because it's porous. Things can come in and out of it. It probably doesn't have a lid, but it's strong and sturdy and has stood the test of time. It's got handles so that we can lift it up. And what it is a safe and flexible container. And that's my visualization. And what practically then do I mean and do I say about the container when I have it in my mind's eye? What we're doing as team coaches is we are gently holding the tensions. So gently and tension feel a bit like an oxymoron, but actually go together really well. I'm at the client today and I was talking about support and challenge at the same time in the system. And so what we're doing is we're providing some structure, I think, and we're allowing the freedom for the client to develop the structure themselves. We're providing some fun and keeping people interested, and we're providing some substance when needed. We might be offering a model to people to ground what they're talking about in the moment. And we're working with individuals and how they show up, and we're working with the whole group. So essentially, what are we doing is we're providing a place of safety for the group to learn, develop, flex, and grow. When we went through these 4 sessions, there's a whole range of really good discussion. I came away and have since discussed with Diane what we talked about on the sessions. And we were left then with 3 things that we were still really very interested in. We were interested in whether or not gathering data before the first team coaching session helps or harms the process. And I'm delighted to see that many, many of you who are joining us today have already completed the Stellar Model questionnaire. So I'll come on to how we use that in a moment when we talk through the process that we use and the data gathering that we do. So these are the questions that we're going to talk about later on in the discussion groups, and we'll come back to them at the end. The second question is, what is our responsibility then as the team coach once we've gathered that data in how we handle it, how we share it, when we share it, and the timing of that data that we gather, and whether or not we share it and who with. And that knocks up against an ethical discussion, we think. And then finally, the final question we'll debate later is, do we need a structured process to guide our interventions as a team coach? So in the second session that we ran in this series through October, we talked about the process. And this is the process that we use. And many of you will be familiar with a version of this, and this mightn't be the version you use, but we use the OD cycle, the organizational development cycle, to guide our process of any intervention that we do in an organization, but especially with team coaching. And you'll see from the way that this is structured that the 1, 2, 3, and 4 all happen before we get in the room. So there's a lot of work that happens with clients before we actually get to what you might see as team coaching, which is the action taken section of this. Then we have the action taken session, which might be 1, 2, 6 engagements with the client, usually more than one. And then we have the after, if you like. Usually what we will do once we've done the entry and contracting phase, is we will do the Stellar Model questionnaire with clients. So many of you have completed it. You will see it's 16 questions about what we think of the team at that moment in time. Then we will do a one-to-one with the team members. Everyone that we're going to be working with in that group, we'll meet them on a one-to-one, and we'll ask them a series of questions. always the same questions. It's a guided interview. Questions like, what's it like to be part of this team? A really open and quite mild question that brings with it a lot of important information. We might do individual psychometrics of many different types that we're qualified in. And then we can roll those together to a team psychometric. And we will really heavily talk to the client about what they're saying to us is anonymous. We won't attribute it to that person, but it isn't confidential because we will use the information with the client system when we need to. So then when we get to a feedback section, number 4, what are we doing with that information? We will usually then be feeding it back to the client that we've contracted with. So Diane and I will probably both be able to tell you some stories about when we haven't handled this as well as we could have in the past. And we might have got into a room and done the feedback in front of everybody. And actually, it's both disrespectful, it's not helpful to the process, for the client to not understand what data that we found in the system. We might also feed back to somebody individually in the team if we've had feedback about them, because it would be unhelpful to use that information in the room with everybody before we've talked to that person about it. And what we would also probably do if we've done psychometrics is we would give individual debriefing or one-to-one feedback to the individuals. The group level feedback on all of this is saved until we get into the room with people. So we get into the room with people and we're doing the group level work. And what we would then do is we would usually, what we would call is a gallery walk in session 1 out of 4 or 6 that we've contracted for with the team. And that would mean we would be feeding back the outcomes of the Stellar Model questionnaire at a team level. We would be feeding back to them the outcomes of what they've said in the one-to-one. And by the way, that would be verbatim as to how they've told us their story of the organisation and the team. Because if we don't do it verbatim, we are theming and we are taking away the ownership from them of the data that they've told us. The only time it wouldn't be verbatim is if we've agreed with them that we'll take out unhelpful feedback about an individual in the room that if we go back to the previous step, we're dealing with that individual. What we will then do with them is the first session would usually be about them taking all of that information and then making some decisions on their information and their work. What is the priority of the work that they then want to go ahead and do as a team with the information we've given them? So the first question then, this is quite a big preamble. 1 to 5 is a lot of work. Does this help or hinder the process of team coaching when we get in the room? So that's the first one to think about. So build up to the second question. This is talking about the ripple effect and the data. So Diane, I'm wondering, while I take another glass of water and order another one from my handy assistant, do you want to talk about what you're doing with this at the moment? And I'll press the slides on if you can still come in.
Absolutely. So in terms of sharing the data and that ripple effect, to me, it's absolutely vital because not only do I usually follow the pattern of the diagnostic and then one-to-one interviews, and it starts this ripple in the organization. And I'm sure many of you do this anyway. And the why behind it, for me, why this is valuable, is that one's not just diving in to start a team coaching journey, and the ripples have started in the organization of what is this, why is this, who are they? And to me, the ripples are vital, so that the journey starts way before. And actually, for me, the team coaching starts at that first day of one-to-one interviews and the diagnostic.
Thanks, Diane. I'm just going to say we've recently been using the Stellar model, using the diagnostic with a client that you're working with. And I think it'd be good to just very briefly give the headlines of what happened with that client and the data reveal.
Yeah. So this is a global client based in Austin, Berlin, and London. And in the first data reveal, and bearing in mind this the diagnostic was aimed at a level of in this organization as a whole. And I'm working with the top 50 managers, which includes the management team. And somebody in one of the locations said, "Oh, but that doesn't look like us. We're not as kind as that." And I had a dilemma because the following week I was working with the management team, and in my head was a curiosity of, what if I cut the data, which I hadn't up to that day? What if I cut the data by location? And I then decided, because I wasn't sure, and this for me as a team coach is vital, and Dawn and I always use this frame of who is it in service of that we do anything. And so I cut the data, and oh my goodness, what the person had said, one could then see in the data. I still was unsure of whether it was in service of showing the management team the cut data as well as the overall. And I often just sleep on things. Dawn and I had a conversation about this, and we support each other and challenge each other enormously. And I decided I would share the data. And I've only shared it at the management team level. And I do believe that that's where it's best in service. And I'm relieved to say, and I wasn't sure this would happen, but they've taken it seriously, and they have set some tasks for themselves to look at this data in that format in terms of the different locations. So I took a risk, and I'm relieved.
Thanks. Thank you very much for that. My emergency water supply has just arrived. Thank you very much. And I am ready to come back. So what we're saying really is, when we've got a consideration of this data, we've got the slices of data that we can really manipulate in whatever way we want to. And our overriding question is that in service of the team that we're working with? And under that expertise title there, I've just put a marker for us to think about, is it our view that we need to rely on? Is it their requirement? What would be best in service of them as a team to share this data? And when do we do that? Once they've got to a position where they're ready to accept it, do we do it all at once? Do we do it when it's too soon? And there's almost a notice what we're noticing about ourselves in that moment when we're working with the team to understand, along with the client, what would best be useful for them. So the second question that I referred to earlier is, what's our responsibility when handling this data? What are we relying on to guide that responsibility and the way that we take it forward? So coming on to the build up to the last section, what we use in People and OD Partners, and what Diane's been using, and what some of you have already experienced in terms of the questionnaire, is we use something called the Stellar model, which is our process and our guiding leadership model for teams. How do leaders and teams show up together? And this beautiful picture that you can see before you sits in my hallway. It's about 1.5 meters tall, and it's painted by Manu Wathuga Dardakin, who's a local Indigenous artist and storyteller. And he has painted what I drew as our model at the time. And this is his depiction of it. This is what we use as our pictorial representation in all of our graphics of the Stellar model. And what you can see running through the picture in the background is the water. And that is the central symbol, the Indigenous symbol for purposefully, which is the central element of the Stellar model. So really, the background to this is we are looking at what makes high functioning teams. And for us, my work is predominantly in the public sector. And I have got a passion for making sure that public sector leaders do better in their teams, because they're spending the public money, and we need to support them to be better in what they do. And that's a slightly different terminology from high performing, but nonetheless means that they're growing together and moving forward. So we will ask them the questions in the data gathering exercise, 2 questions for each of these 8 elements about what they individually think about their team at the moment. And then we'll pull that data together and we'll have a team report, which we can cut in many ways, as we've previously discussed. And these definitions that you see on the screen here are our definitions of what each element means. So purposefully means the why of the team or the organisation. The 3 that run along the bottom are our what elements. So accountably, strategically, and decisively. Accountability meaning setting expectations, holding to account, delivering on commitments, strategically the vision and the planning, and decisively making clear, good, right time decisions. Then the top half of the model is our how. How are we with each other? How do we behave with each other? Do we behave kindly, compassionately, etc.? Are we vulnerable? Do we show that we need help, admit mistakes, have high levels of trust? Are we curious? Do we behave curiously? And that's where conflict for us sits. And it holds conflict really nicely in a space of our view is we can't be defensive and curious at the same time. So if we're curious about how we are showing up and curious about how other people are showing up in conflict situations, then that leaves our mind open to explore, question, discuss. And clearly, really clear about people's roles, what needs to be done, and clear on performance. Here we sort of think about the organisations that we work in and what we do see and what we don't see often in teams that help or hinder that team process. So where do we use this model in the practice of team coaching? We use it in 3 places. So we've already talked about where we use it at the beginning. We data gather, we use it as a diagnostic. And at the start of the group, the process with the team, they determine the priorities. What that will then mean is we will then work with them over 4 or 6 sessions around those elements with flex, depending on what they've chosen. We pretty much always have to cover purpose. And there's 1 or 2 others that we pretty much always have to cover. And actually, our preference would be to make sure we skate around all of them so that they can discuss what it means to be a really high-performing team or a team that's better than when it started. And we reassess then at the end of the engagement whether or not they've moved. We've got a maturity matrix that they can map themselves on at the beginning, they can map themselves on at the end. And are they then able 12 months later or 6 months later to do that again and see if they've either maintained or moved? So this sounds quite structured. I do want to emphasize, actually, it's pretty flexible because they're making up the rules as they go along. And what we're providing as a team coach, back to the title in the beginning, is a container to hold them safely, but firmly as we move through the process that they are co-creating with each other as we move through their team coaching sessions. The final question: do we need a structured process to guide our interventions as a team coach? So the Stellar model then, if you haven't yet done the questionnaire, just go and give it a go. The QR code on the screen will take you to the site to do the questionnaire. It's free. 2 minutes, you'll get back your view of the team that you might be in or a team that you might be working with. What's your view of them? And it'll help you then answer the questions. Is it useful to have diagnostics at the beginning? Is it useful to have a process? So just a reminder, in a moment, we're going to be going into discussion groups, and Nicola will put you into discussion groups, and I will just recap the questions, and the questions will appear as a link in the discussion groups as you enter them. So question 1. Does data gathering before the first team coaching session help or harm the process, or something in between maybe? What is our responsibility in the handling, sharing, and timing of the data we gather as a team coach? And finally, do we need a structured process to guide our interventions as a team coach? Or other end of the spectrum, should it just be free and we just go where the team goes when we work with them? So I'm going to stop sharing. And Nicola will then give us some process about how we then enter into our chat rooms.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up your breakout rooms. Can I double check with you, Dawn, how long we're going out for?
Yeah, I think we'll start with 15 minutes.
15 minutes, marvellous. So I'm just going to just level up some people here. and then I'm going to open the rooms up and you'll come back automatically in 15 minutes. So I shall see you in 15. And when you come back, we'll ask you to spend just a quiet minute, just typing in the chat the kind of things that occurred to you while you've been in the breakout rooms. No need to assign a spokesperson or anything like that. Just come back and just type when you come back. And I will see you in 15 minutes. So I think we're going to spend a quiet minute with the chat. Did you want to introduce that bit, Diane?
Yes, I just wanted to say, do pop in the chat box what your thoughts are after your breakout room. And I just want to give a heads up to Sahana, Esther, and Harriet. I'm shortly after the minute going to bring you in first. And what I'd love you to do is the questions you popped in the chat box earlier, if you could say your question in one sentence. We want to hear from as many voices as possible today. So in that order, and I'll call you in Sahana, Esther, and Harriet. But Nicola, we're still going to have another 45 seconds or so to jot down in the chat box quietly.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm going to give you some little typing music. I hope you can all hear. Just give you another few seconds. Just looking at it, we're still typing. Right, hand over to you, Diane. You should reduce the music. Okay, back to you.
Okay, over to me. Thanks, Nicola. So Sahana, and then Esther, and then Harriet. And Harriet, you've made a few comments, which is valuable. If you can just choose one of your comments or questions, Harriet, that would be wonderful. And so Sahana, in one sentence, give us your question, and then Dawn's going to answer it. Sahana, as you come off mute.
Sure. My question is, what are your thoughts on handing over the data to the team and letting the team decide if they want to share that with the management or the stakeholders?
Yeah, look, I think that's really important. It raises a great point about ownership both of the data and ownership of the process itself. And I think two other things are important considerations to add on to what you've said, which is, who are you contracting with as the client when you're entering into team coaching? So usually for us, what happens, and it will be different in different contexts, is that a leader or a sponsor in an organization, potentially HR or the OD team, might bring us in to work with the team. But the power and respect of the leader that's working with the team that you're working for is a really important consideration, which is why I referenced in the presentation that if we have contracted with the leader would be the first place we would go back to give them the heads up of what we're going to be revealing in the room. It's unusual, but I'll bring Diane in a minute, because I know she's done some work recently with another organisation where it was a really quite a flat-owned organisation in a stately home, and worked a lot with the team there. But we still have the client that we have reference to. So there's an ethics question and an ownership question. We sort of are saying we do what you're asking, in that very first session, when we're presenting what we've heard them say about themselves back to them. So that old adage of holding a mirror up to them, we're then saying, what do you want to do with this data? Who do you want to share it with? Where do you want to go with it next? How do you want it to guide the process that you want to then go through? What's it telling you? And honestly, often what I find time and time again is that the power of individuals in one team saying, oh, we all think that. Isn't that interesting? I thought I was the only one that thought that about us. We all think that we work in silos, or we all think that we're not as kind as we could be, or whatever it might be. So then owning what they do with that is their decision-making. So Diane, you're getting an announcement from the airport behind you. She might come on in a minute. So maybe Sahana, I'll just come back to you first before I go to Diane. Does that answer your question? I think my short answer is yes, we absolutely do that when the context is right to do it. So is there more the answer that you need?
Okay, thank you, Dawn.
Okay. Diane, do you want to just talk about what was the client that I was referencing where you work with the larger ops group?
Yeah. So I initially worked very closely with the client, who was the director. And then one of her objectives was to encourage her managers to step up and take ownership. So during the process of a year, what we did was to bring in those 3 managers together with her when we were recontracting along the way. And then what happened was that they would take ownership, they would open the sessions, and they would often, the director stepped back from the actions and the managers stepped forward, plus the supervisors under them, to deliver on the action. So it was tied closely to the outcome that the director wanted. And I think that's how Dawn and I work, is it isn't the same with every client. It really depends on what the need was from the client. And this was a very clear need. She needed decentralization and stepping up of the managers and supervisors below her.
Yeah, thank you. Are we going to Esther next? Esther's set up to speak, I think.
Okay, my question, I mean, Dawn, you answered some of it already, but my question is, when in the process do you actually collect data? I strongly believe data are an important part of coaching. And the other part of coaching is establishing trust. So if you preempt it at the very beginning without framing why are you doing what, for what reason, and how you're going to use the data, clients may be uncomfortable and not trusting. So is it maybe better to collect the data after the first session, after contracting?
Yeah, look, and contextually, it might be depending on what presents when you do the contracting conversation with the client. I'll give you my view and why we do what we do in the way that we do it now, although, you know, we flex because you've got to with team coaching. I have found it to be suboptimal for the first time the team who I'm going to be working with for, say, 6 sessions or 6 months or however long it's going to be, for that, the very first time they meet me, hear me, experience me, to be when we get them in the room for the first session of team coaching. So practically what happens is I'll contract with the director, say, or the leader of the team, and talk to them about what team coaching is. They might know a bit about it, talk them through the process of what we're going to do. And then very nuts and bolts, they will then send out an email, or at a team meeting, they will talk to their team and say, somebody called Dawn or Diane or whoever it is in the team will be in touch with you, and they will be making a 30-minute or an hour's long meeting with you. And it's about this thing we've discussed that we're going to do about supporting and developing our team. And Dawn will meet with you on a one-to-one, and she'll have a discussion and introduce herself and ask you some questions. And that's all the one-to-one interviews are framed as, really. And also given them the power. Somebody else asked about power. I think it's one of Harriet's questions, to then own the process of those meetings. We then talk to them about confidentiality and trust. And I am continually beautifully surprised when I then, and it happens to all of us, so it isn't just something about me, when we show up in those one-to-ones and we say to them, we really want to know, really want to work with the team, we really want to know what it's like. And we ask them 4 or 5 questions in a guided interview, and we explain to them that we will be using what they tell us in total, verbatim, back to the team, but we won't associate it to them as individuals. And with their permission, we'll modify it if it identifies them or identifies other individuals. How open they are, because most people will enter into that with a level of trust. And of course, then it's beholden on us when we get in the room to live up to the trust they've put into us by giving us that information. Really interesting to see the data, the results coming back from the Stellar Model questionnaire that they do too, because they are universally open, honest. People tell it as it is. And then when we play it back to them on the wall, on a poster, on a set of slides, they go, oh yeah, that is it. That's exactly what it's like here. Yes, I recognize that. Or as Diane said earlier, well, it's like that here, but it's not like that in Berlin, or it's not like that in Rome or whatever. And then we split the data by country, and then they go, oh yeah, that's exactly what it's like. Okay, so we've got, if you think about the trust equation, A, these people know what they're talking about because they're telling us what it's like. B, then we can trust them because they've handled our data gently and anonymously, as they said they would. And B, okay, I've opened my mind up enough and I'll go along that kind of journey. So by preference, I wouldn't gather that data in the room. But of course, every moment that you're in team coaching, you're gathering other data, aren't you? That's just what the job is. Diane, what say you on that matter?
Dawn, I do have a comment on it, but I'm going to ask Andrew. Andrew, is your question related to this particular question? Do you want to come off mute?
Yeah, it's kind of, and that's basically the that there's a big cultural context. I think we're assuming that everyone likes having these personal questions and doing a bit of group therapy and coaching. I'm working with a lot of people from the Middle East at the moment. This would not work with people from the Middle East. There's a different cultural layer. There's a cultural layer here in terms of leadership style, in terms of management style, and it's just I'm not saying this is not appropriate in the right context, but dealing a lot with people around Europe and around the Middle East, there's a sensitivity about how you address leadership and management in different cultures. That's all I'm sort of suggesting.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more. And I think I think the initial contracting with the leader about how you do these things is vital. And doesn't any supervision that we go into as coaches, I mean, I don't think I've ever been in a group supervision session where one of us hasn't brought up contracting, as a thing that we always need to be mindful of. And you know what would really be helpful, Andrew, is, I don't know if you've done the Stellar Model questionnaire yet, and if you have or you haven't, if you do it and look at it through the frame of reference of how would this land in other cultures, I'd be fascinated to have that conversation. That would be a great addition to the Stellar Model about, yes, it might need to go in different languages, but does it need to be culturally tempered? I'd love to hear that back. Yeah.
Dawn, I'm going to make one comment on Esther's question about the data. So, Esther, what I find is that actually the one-to-one interviews help enormously because of what Dawn said, in that we discuss the confidentiality and the anonymity of the data. And, I visibly see people sort of going, breathing, and then when I ask the structured questions, I do believe a shift has happened in their trust of me. And then I need to deliver, because on the day when we do meet and share the data, I need to deliver well. And I've got an example later where this hasn't gone well, but I won't say that now. I'll save that for later, because we do need Harriet. So Harriet, you've got some lovely comments that you've popped in the chat box, including that about data and is it true or not? So Harriet, which one of your many comments do you want to choose as a comment or a question as you come off mute?
Thank you. I think a lot of what you've been talking about is wrapped up in this, my initial point about power. And I'm not sure if I'm looking for an answer. It's something that I'm reflecting on both as a one-to-one and a team coach at the minute, is where does our power lie? When we collect data, it's extractive. When we present data, we look like experts. When we contract with a leader, we're often undermining the very problem that we're dealing with. It could be the leader that is undermining the performance of a team. And I fully second Andrew's point about the Middle East. I've done a lot of work in the Middle East, and the hierarchies of management are, but those cultural differences exist in every single organization, and we need to be aware of them. And so really, I'm not sure if I'm asking a question. I think how do you as a coach remain mindful of the power that exists between you and your co-coach, assuming you always work with one, and you and the different members of the team, and you and the team and its power within itself and beyond, because these are all at play in the realization of added value for the business that comes from a team? Sorry, it's a big question, but it's
a huge question. I might need a whole load more water to answer that one.
I'm not sure if I'm looking for an answer. I was just going on in my head.
And I don't know if I've got a really succinct answer to that as a question. I think the notion and reality of power in the relationship as a coach with a system is just one to be ever mindful of, is it not? Diane and I have a great saying, notice what you notice and name what you notice, right? So, and that will be true for many of us in our kind of self-reflection work that we're doing, and in managing our own presence, our own, how we are showing up in the room, and the kind of space that we are occupying in the room with the leader, with the members, in the one-to-ones, and in the system as a whole. If we go back to because the reason why we're doing this session now is those series of 4 sessions. Yesterday's session, which we haven't finished the booklet on, was all about who is the team coach, like what are they, what are they showing up with, and essentially what we said in that session is, as a team coach is engaged, and maybe an individual coach is engaged for this purpose too, to provide something that's not present in the system. Because if it was present, maybe we wouldn't be needed, because the system would be healing itself. Now, so I think where I'm going with that is we provide support and challenge, some nudges, some inquiry into the system to allow the system to look at itself and make decisions. And I think that that's where the power lies. Where Diane always says this, and she might want to come in and say this, is that our job is to not be noticed eventually, because they are doing their work. And when I'm training other people in what, you can call facilitation skills or group process work or team coaching, when I'm training other people, the overriding absolute principle in all of this is it's their work. And I think that speaks to power too. So the minute you stand up at the flip chart and note down what they're saying, you've taken the power out of the room. Because it never gets done, believe it, if we adopt any power in the system. So a random collection of thoughts, Harriet, and Diane, the bit about the leaving it with them and it being them not noticing us is that came from you, really.
So my comment is that I use a phrase with a client and say, my job is to become invisible. And I had a beautiful example of that when working with a board. And they said, when we reviewed, they said, gosh, Diane, we actually hardly mentioned you. And I thought, fantastic, my job is done. Having worked with them over a 4-month period with some very tricky diversity and inclusion as the outcome they were looking for. So, Dawn, there is a great question from Karen, and then Jared McCann has got a question as well. So, Karen, if you can come off mute and give your question, and then Gerard, if you can get ready to come off mute once Dawn has commented, I'll bring you in again. So, okay, so maybe we'll try Jared.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Fab, over to you.
Lovely. I'm just very interested in the design of the Stellar questionnaire. Who's involved in making those questions?
So those questions have been standard questions for about 10 years. The Stellar model's evolved over a 10-year period. And so the questions have evolved ever so slightly in language. But we work with an organizational psychologist who's tested and verified the questions and how they've been designed. And we're just about getting enough data from the responses of the Stellar model to be able to, and question to the group, I'm not sure this is going to be helpful or not, but I'm interested in the outcome, to be able to provide some norms for organizations. And the purpose of gathering that data from thousands and thousands of different respondents over the last 10 years is for research purposes. So I'm pooling that information together for just some independent research, which is signed up to as part of a PhD. And so I'm not the team we work with don't design those questions. That might be behind your question, Gerard. However, we do the one-to-one interview questions. We do have a standard group that we will pull from just for consistency and honestly knowing what works with clients in the past. But when we contract in a system, we will talk about what questions will be useful to ask in that space in the one-to-one interviews, and agree that with the client. Does that answer your question, Gerard? Yeah, looks like it does. I think he's nodding. Thumbs up. Fab. Okay.
I see that Karen is with us. So, Karen, you had a question as well. Do you want to give it to Dawn?
Yeah, sure. It's just the Stellar questionnaire. You mentioned sharing some of the outcomes. So I was wondering, when do you do it before you do the interviews? Do you do it after the interviews? Have you done it both ways?
Done it both ways and probably had it half and half, actually. And I mean, I was going to say it probably doesn't matter. Of course it matters, because Diane and I have another phrase that we use quite often. There's no such thing as a neutral question, which might speak to Gerard's point too, right? And that's where the ripple is on the slide. Once you've asked any question in a system, once you've even just shown up with an expression on your face in a system, you've already started to create some helpful or unhelpful change depending on your use of self. So I guess it probably does matter whether the questionnaire is answered before people meet us, because they will already be creating an impression of what the work might be like. What usually happens in practice, and Diane will give her view on this too, is that an email will go out from the leader or the person who we've contracted with, maybe the HR sponsor, and say, here team, I'm introducing you to Dawn. She's going to come and meet you. She'll ask you some questions and tell you what the process is going to be like. And here's a link to the psychometric you might want to fill out before you meet her, because she's going to do a debrief with you at the same time. And B, here's a link to the Stellar model questionnaire, and the Stellar model is some structure that we might use during this process that we're all going to go through. So some of them, what I find happens in practice is that some of them will have filled the questionnaire in before they meet, and some of them I'll need to say, so then what I need you to do before we get in the room is to have completed the questionnaire. Maybe we should do some research on whether the outcomes are different, whether they do before or after. Diane, what say you on that?
Yeah, I've got a strong view on it, and it's from my baggage about using Myers-Briggs and FireOB, and the email that came from the organization used to be so awful. They have changed it now, but it would often land in spam. But the design of the email was so robotic. So I tend to do the interviews first so that people know who we are, and then say, and now you will be getting an email and this is what it will look like, so that there's no surprise. Otherwise, I don't know about you, but with 200 emails in their inbox daily, are people even going to know what the Stellar questionnaire is? Yeah. So that's my view on it. Dawn, we've got Eva. I don't know if I'm saying your name correctly. Could you come off mute, Eva? You've had some interesting questions. Would you like to come off mute?
So one of the main highlights was that we see data as very important before the team coaching process starts because of many different reasons. One, it helps us understand what's happening, and it also helps team to understand what is happening very often, because they are just not aware about some situations, especially what stakeholders might see or expect, and it gives different scope of the process. And also it creates a trust between team coaches and the team. And actually, when we enter team coaching process as such, there is a much higher psychological safety right at the beginning than if we would have just come to the first session, okay, let's start, and nobody knows nobody, and it's like it would be a challenge.
Yeah, and I've also seen that you said the process should be as free and flowing as possible, and I guess that was what was behind the question about should we have a process. And I've been looking at the comments from a few people about, and I suppose the summary of the comments seemed to be sort of both and. We need a container, we need a process, we need some structure, and we need to be able to spin on a dime as soon as in the in-room experience flips, and we have to then pull something out of our kit bag that's brand new that we weren't going to plan that would happen in the room that day, and lo and behold, it has. And so that's probably about competence, confidence, practice, experience, and about allowing that flow to happen in the room, as it will naturally in any experience when you've got more than one person in a room. Yeah.
Can I add comment on structure? Because I was sharing in our breakout rooms that I have like 3 points in a structure, and that's all structure I'm working with. So the first one, I usually ask team a day before the coaching session to share with me what topics they would like to work on in the next session. So it gives them time to prepare and meet and discuss, and it gives me possibility to prepare. If I need to, or want to use something special during session, I might never use it. So, but still, it gives some time to prepare. At the same time, when we come to real session, it might be that they have completely different topic, which is more important to them at the current situation, because something might have happened in 24 hours. Yeah. So you never know. Second thing, which is in my structure, it's the beginning of the session. It's setting a pace and a goal for today's session. And the third point, it's the ending of the session. Yeah. So it's like saying like putting together summary and the next steps, and helping them to check whether they know what they're doing, and everything else, it just flows.
Yeah, they're great points. And one of the things we talked about, I think it would have been in session 3 of these October series, was what's called the Workshop Canoe by Dick and Emily Axelrod. We've in Australia, with their blessing, rechristened it to the Workshop Surfboard, and it's because it's shaped, with a pointy end at either end. And if you've never seen this before, it's really worth a look. And their work on this is, long in the history books. And I think their book is called Making Meetings Work, I would say. And they have a really good process at the beginning, which is welcome. And then it's about everybody connecting, what's happened since we last time we met. Then it's about getting everybody in the same place in the room so that they're all present, which is discover, they call it. Then they have a section called elicit, which is, they call it elicit people's dreams, but it's actually about creating newness for the future. So this is what we all get to a point where we can agree it is now, and the next phase is what do we want to be like. Then we make some concrete plans for what it can actually really be like, because what we might want it to be like mightn't be possible in our system. So this is what we can really put into practice. And then the last one is really important. It really speaks to what you said. It's called attend, and that's attend to the end. And that isn't about was it a great tea and coffee that came, what was the room temperature right, or all of that stuff, which might be important. It's about what happened for us as a team today in this session.
there is I'm not sure if it's a question, Kate, or a comment on something that Dawn has said, but I'm going to hand the microphone over to you, Kate.
It was just born of an experience in the public sector where the finance director told me really of how difficult he was finding his work, and gave me information that was difficult for me to hold. And that whole business of confidentiality and all of the stuff that was worked out before, there was some responsibility to the organization he was working in. Yeah. And that conflict stayed with me, has stayed with me. I mean, it didn't. I dropped large hints in the end, but I didn't change my responsibility and my promise. Just think that that's one that people might not have come across and might come across in the future.
Yeah, so that sounds like quite a heavy burden, Kate, and I completely understand it. So I work, or 98% of my clients are in the public sector, both still in the UK and in Australia. We work a lot in the NHS, Diane and I together as partners, and I work a lot in public healthcare here. So as a one-to-one coach, and I'll just give you what my coaching contract says on this, and the same contract is applied to team coaching. It says I will absolutely maintain confidentiality of what you say to me unless you're going to hurt yourself or someone else, you tell me you've done something illegal, or you're telling me, and this applies in public healthcare, but other public sector organizations, you're telling me something, and I'll give you the healthcare example, but that would go against the safety and quality and ethical standpoint of the organization that you're in. And what I will do if you do that is I will say to you, I understand what you're saying and I hear it, and we'll deal with your response to it maybe in a coaching session. We need to take that information somewhere else now because it's hit one of those or more than one of those three markers. How do you want to handle that? You are the guardian of the information. If you take it somewhere, I can provide you support. If you don't take it anywhere, I will have to, and this is what I will do. So I will give you a period of time to take it somewhere, and then I will do that. And that applies for me. And I've been faced with a number of those over the working with clinicians and the pressure they're under, working with finances in public sector. And Diane, would that be the same for you with the clients that you're working with?
Yes, because the difference in our clients is that I work in private sector and in public sector and in the charity sector and heritage sector, so across many different sectors, but absolutely the same applies. And it's all about that safety, and if we are put in that position, what we will do with it. But it's clear contracting, as we would do as coaches, as we do as team coaches.
Yeah.
So Francoise, I think there was a question to Harriet, and I'll leave you to be messaging and Harriet to be messaging you. And although the question that's interesting there is modeling vulnerability can be a great way forward with a team. So Dawn, I wonder if you would like to comment on that, knowing that one of the elements of the Stellar model is vulnerability. So Dawn, if you want to, a question for everyone. Okay, so actually, Francoise, can you come off mute? Dawn, can you get ready about the vulnerability? But I would like, Francoise, can you actually ask your question in one sentence? That would be fabulous. Are you ready?
Oh, he can't. Oh, she can't. Sore throat. I'm so sorry.
Which is what all right. So Dawn, your comments about us role modeling vulnerability.
Yeah, I'll cover that, and I'll also cover, because I'm conscious that we'll need to at some point go into the networking. I'm also going to cover the importance to coaches. That's come up from a few people, and I think Harriet mentioned it earlier on as well. So you'll see that one of the elements in the Stellar model is vulnerability. And increasingly across just leadership development, leadership world, writing, research, that what we see is that vulnerable leadership is more and more necessary. Diane and I do a lot of work in the NHS and in other healthcare systems on how people who work in those systems are responding to the pressure they were put under during COVID. So we work with them on the trauma of that and how they're recovering from that. And so in order to be able to show up for a team just more generally, slightly away from the team coaching topic, if we're having team meetings, what we talk to them about is how do we create a sense of connection at the beginning of a meeting, how we create a sense of belonging during the meeting, and how we then create a sense of vulnerable reflection at the end of the meeting. So we're talking to them in about tools and techniques to be able to do that. And one of the really simple things that we talk to them about is about using we when we're saying, oh, we feel that this is really difficult. We feel, and I feel like this, and the leader being able to express that rather than asking people, how do you feel? How do you feel? How do you feel? And we work with them on some exercises to do that. I also think that our role as a coach is to keep the room feeling a safe level of trust in us. So we have to have things to offer them when they are showing vulnerability. So when they begin to open up, we have to hold them in that space and keep them at the edge of that vulnerability so that they can all develop together, rather than feeling uncomfortable with people expressing that vulnerability. So us doing some self-work on our own vulnerability, our own ability to ask for help, our own ability to seek support, which leads me on to the two coaches together, is just absolutely hardwired through anybody who wants to be in this space of team coaching, I'm guessing. So let me just move on to what I'm saying about number two, which is the working with people. Now, I think this is a really interesting one, because if you go on a lot of especially the EMCC training for team coaches to become accredited as an EMCC team coach, then a lot of the perceived wisdom and there's a really good reason for it, is that having two coaches working together in the room as team coaching is important, if not vital. I sort of the jury's out for me on this one, actually. A lot of team coaching that I work with, I do on my own, and Diane does a lot, if not most, of her team coaching on her own. But what happens around that is vital. So in the preparation phase for getting in the room with people, we are what's effectively doing preparation level supervision. So we've got a tag team of, this is what's coming out of the data. What are you thinking about that? And we're working on it together. Then we might do the session in the room with the client on our own. And then almost immediately when we're out, we're having really good quality, high level supervision. And we've probably often got somebody in there with us who might be observing us, maybe somebody from the operations team who's helping us run the sessions. And certainly in my case, Michelle, who works with me in an operations role, attends a lot of the sessions and sets them up, and will also observe what I'm doing and has the permission, and if not job role, to give good feedback. So I think the jury's out. I think we do train the trainer too, right? Where we're teaching other people how to do this work. And of course, if you're newer, less experienced, less teams under your belt, you absolutely do need good feedback from somebody who you trust, who you've asked to give you that feedback. So look, it's contextual. I don't think it's an absolute two in the room all of the time. And Marina's right. You might not always be able to afford that with a client. It's expensive, and we might not always be able to pass that on to the client, and therefore it's expensive for us as the provider. So I'll leave that up there.
Actually, Dawn, I'd like to comment on that. Just to reiterate that, yes, like Dawn, I work solo in team coaching. However, it's not solo. I'm working, like Dawn does, very closely with a client steering team, as well as the supervision that Dawn is describing. And so recently, in that diversity and inclusion work that I did over a period of about 4 months, which I found I was at the edge of my, it was edge work for me. I went and found a new supervisor who is very experienced in diversity and inclusion. And I got different support and challenge from him. And I sought him out specifically. So because I acknowledge, so I've got my own supervision places that are regular, and Dawn and I provide a regular support challenge supervision for each other. So to me, it depends on what the client's need is and where I am. And the more I'm in this work, the more I get support and challenge for myself. Yeah. Probably is a good summing up.
I'm looking at Esther's question there. What data did you collect from us in this group, and what information did you extract from the questionnaire? So the short answer is none. So yet, and back to you on what you might want to do next would be interesting. So when you go to the portal, fill in the questionnaire, you then get immediately back a report, and that's your individual report about what you think. Now, of course, I can, and the ops team here can go in and access your individual report and look at it, and that's all in the privacy policy information that's on the portal and on our website. But how we run this with teams, and it's fair to say the portal itself is new, last 3 months, I think, and the way that we're pulling the information together from it for clients is still in its, let's call it, a beta phase. So Diane's doing heavy testing at the moment, but I'd be really delighted to do some more testing with any of the rest of you that want to do this. Is that we go into a client, say there's 12 of them or 8 of them. They all individually fill in the Stellar Model questionnaire, and then I would get the 12 responses. We then, for the client, pull all the 12 off, and we create information, set of slides, data, pictures, however we've decided to do that for the client. And then that's their data and their information, and they then choose what to do with it. So because we are not in this session, we are not a team. So it would really serve no purpose for us to go in and create pictures, patterns, data reports for this group, because we're not a team. However, and you all have the information back that you filled in and completed. So I hope that answers the question that was put into the chat box about that. What have we done with this information, and how are we going to use it? We're not. It's for you to use. And if you think it's useful and you want to use the Stellar Model with your clients, and you want to use the portal with your clients, then go for it. It's free. Use it. Individuals will use it. If you want a team report, then come back to me.
Dawn, is a slightly different question, but Francois, are you ready to, if that's how I say your name, I'm not sure. Are you ready to come on?
Has a sore throat, so can't speak.
Oh, yes. So her question is, do you sometimes use external experts, for instance, in communication and stress management? Dawn, I'll leave you to comment on that one.
Yeah, yes is the short answer. So depending what the presenting issues are that the team decide they want to work on, our job is to know what we might be able to provide them and what we might not be able to provide them, what they might be able to provide for themselves. And the former, less so. We're holding them in this space where they're deciding what they need. And if they find a need or surface a need, then I've provided them with contacts to bring in what they might need. But actually, it's about challenging them to work that out. I have put them in contact with people who will work more with them on self-care and on resilience. But team coaching doesn't always bring the issues up that require other people to come in and do input with them, because actually it's about them deciding what they need. And you do the occasional kind of mini lecturette or mini input session, because, for example, if they're all having a big conversation and they've been going for 2 hours and it's a meeting where they're supposed to have made a decision and they haven't made any decisions at all in that time, it's incumbent on the team coach to potentially say, I'm wondering if the purpose of the last 2 hours was to make a decision. I'm not hearing any decisions. What does everybody in the room think of the decision making that's gone on in the room today? And then get them to talk about it. Now, we will, because we've been in this work a long time, have a model or a tool or a frame of reference for decision making that and because we'll have contracted for this in the beginning, that if they show up and discuss that they actually don't really know how to do it, we'll be able to say, well, what about if we talk about this for a bit? And then you maybe try it in the next hour when you need to make a decision. So communications or stress is an interesting set of examples to put in there. I do remember a time when I was working with a whole team of leaders about how they led change, and what they needed was some real professional help about how they fronted up on camera for videos. And so as a coach, wouldn't our approach potentially be, what support do you need in order to best serve the organisation in this change? They discuss that. And we might say, where would you get that support from? So it's about pulling that out of themselves and them going, oh, it might be a good idea if we brought in an expert. Yeah, it might be a good idea if we brought in an expert. How are you going to do that then? Like, what's the first step you're going to do that would be how I would handle it. What about you, Diane?
Dawn, I was chuckling because with the 10F resilience model, for example, so I've got a resilience model that I have designed, but I haven't wanted to be known for resilience until pandemic struck. And then I decided, actually, this model that I'd been using and had developed 15 years ago and have worked with it, that actually this was necessary. And Dawn and I ran just this was learning to do webinars during pandemic. So in answer to your question, back to what Dawn says, depends what the need is, and how do they want to respond to that, and can we resource that, or do we bring somebody else in? So I'm not going to give, like Dawn, just as Dawn's given an open answer in that, it depends what the client's need is, primarily.
Yeah.
And what the client's budget is as well. So again, Francois, that might be different because, so very much. A question I've learned to be very bold about is, what's your budget?
Yeah. I'm just looking at Andrew's comment about stress and tension being a positive moment and a moment of truth. These happen all the time, don't they, in team coaching, and they happen in one-to-one coaching. It's kind of that beautiful moment which you don't want to get too excited about, where the client goes, oh, okay, that's why. And holding that space then about not going, oh, fabulous. Because then that, back to the points made earlier, that sort of puts you to front and center, that puts you back in a position of power. It's about saying, yeah, and I that's the joy of the work of team coaching, is absolutely seeing a team go on to deliver amazing things once they've sat together, being vulnerable together, and being able to then go, oh, okay, that's why this hasn't been working up to now. This is what we're going to do about it. Just love it. It's brilliant. Yeah, I'm wondering if that was a beautiful phrase from Dawn. I don't know where that came from. For us to maybe go, end on or go into the networking. What say you, Nicola?
That sounds like a really, really good point. I would like to just note, Andrew, you had a hand up there. Did you want to just come in for a?
Yeah,
it's just that point about the uncomfortable part of coaching. It was when I first qualified, it was with my supervisor at my master's. It was a thing that I thought I found very difficult, because sometimes in one-to-one coaching and with team coaching, there's that moment and you think, have I upset people? Have I done something wrong? And that is often the most difficult bit, is holding that little bit of discomfort, the realization that, you know what, our team may not be as great as we think we are. Yeah. Based on, and it's not always in adaptive leadership, it's not always about how the team feel, it's about what other people feel about the team as well. Right. It's great if you think your sales team's great, but what if the accounting team, the IT team, the HR team, the senior leadership team, the operations team all say your team is really bad to deal with? And I think it's only an objective person who's like a coach who can bring that kind of research into it. And it's the same with one-to-one coaching. What if your behavior is disruptive or upsetting people? And that's that acceptance, which is often, I still find it difficult when we uncover those things. And I think in teams, it can be even more sort of uncomfortable.
Yeah, look, I'm really with you. I feel differently about it. I'm not going to say I feel uncomfortable about it now. I feel, oh, thank goodness we've got to that point. I feel a sense of relief actually now I'm talking about, okay, this has taken us 3 sessions to get to this point. And then my response, and Diane's exactly the same because I've seen her work, my response then is to say, you know, when they might look a bit afraid or they might look like they want to back off, is to say, I can see that this is uncomfortable for you. That's what I'm sensing. Am I right? Or is that how I'm feeling? Okay, that's good. That's good. Let's stay here for a bit longer. And I'll just give you a really quick anecdote, and people will disappear if they're sick of listening to us by now. But I was working with a healthcare system up in the far north of Queensland in Australia. I'd been working with them for 4 sessions, got 5th session, all brilliant, got in the room, was supposed to be doing strategic planning in that session that they decided they were going to do. And I'm doing a check-in. What's the highlights since last time? Lowlights? How are we going to all come in the room? And everybody shared. It was beautiful. It was going to be a great session. The finance director went, yeah, most people have been great in the last session, apart from her. And that's what he did to somebody across the table. And just let out this thing. And I thought, oh, you know, inside you're thinking, oh, this wasn't what I had planned for today. So I just said, what can you say to that? I just said, okay, it seems like we're going to go on a different track today. What do we want to do with this that's just landed in the middle of the room then? And let them decide agenda that we had planned or this. And of course it was this. How do we want to deal with it? What do you want to do? What do you want? You know, and you just, it's just part of the job. It's part of the joy and the fabulousness. And it makes it a great space to be in. And I'm very grateful to work in the role. Diane, have you got anything to say?
In fact, what comes to mind is the Mian Chung Judge paper called The Use of Self. And for Dawn and I, learning, and she used to call it, I'm going to spit in your soup. And Dawn and I have learned how to skillfully, and I love Dawn's voice because my South African voice is sometimes more blunt than her Liverpudlian, but just this, oh, what are we going to do with this in the room? And just that, but at the same time, to me, it's being a swan where under the water, I might be going, but actually being able to hold the space, presence, and what's going on in the room and using ourselves as an instrument is the Mian Chung Judge article.
Yeah.
What a great anecdote and a great insight to end this brilliant session on as well. Dawn and Diane, I just want to thank you so much. I think who said this in the chat? Just this generosity of sharing your time and knowledge with us, says Marina. Absolutely. I think we've all learned so much from you and from each other, and really had an opportunity to challenge ideas, seek new ways of doing things. and just hear from each other's perspectives and experience as well. So just on behalf of the MCC Global, just like to thank you both for coming and leading this fantastic discussion today.